Honourable Member for Toronto Centre.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Speaker, I will be sharing my time with the member for Mount Royal. Mr. Speaker, I want to spend my time in the debate talking a little bit about the challenges that we face. I appreciate the comments that have been made by the two spokesmen for the government. I think it does represent a change on the part of government policy. It means that Canada is finally catching up with the views that have been expressed by a number of countries around the world over the last several weeks. It's been very troubling to me that, in fact, the government of Canada has been consistently behind the concerns that have been expressed by a great many other governments and countries, including the Prime Minister of the United Kingdom, Mr. Brown, the Foreign Minister, Mr. Miliband, the spokesman on international affairs for the European Union, Louis Michel, Secretary of State Clinton a couple of days ago, a number of people who've been moving ahead. And it's been troubling for me as a Canadian, Mr. Speaker, to see that our government has been behind. But the glass is always either half full or half empty. I prefer to see it as half full. I'm glad the minister's made the statement that he's made today with respect to the position of the Government of Canada. I had a chance to say that to him today, and I appreciate the comments that have been made by the Minister of International Development as well. Mr. Speaker, a number of my colleagues in the Liberal Party will be speaking this evening based on their own personal experience. I want to just say a couple of things. I have had an opportunity over the last decade to be involved in this terribly tragic situation in Sri Lanka. And I think it's fair to say that, like so many other people around the world who visited and who've been affected by what's gone on, it is a situation that has touched me a great deal. Like my leader and friend, the leader of the official opposition, I have lost friends, Mr. Speaker, journalists, political leaders, activists on all sides of the conflict who are no longer with us because they've been killed. My experience is nothing in comparison with the experience of a great many people, many of whom are in the House tonight, who have lost family. I've seen whole towns destroyed by bombing. I've seen the rubble stretching for miles on end. I had an opportunity to meet with the rebel leaders in the Vani in Sri Lanka nearly a decade ago after the ceasefire. I've since been back many times. I've spent many days, indeed weeks, meeting with them as well as with the government of Sri Lanka, trying to see if there wasn't a way of resolving the profound differences that exist between the two warring parties. Perhaps I can just provide the House with some observations as to where I think we need to be and where we need to go as a country in terms of our policy and our direction, and clearly what the nature of the dispute in Sri Lanka really is. And I want to make it very clear, Mr. Speaker, that I'm not one of those people who's carrying an argument on behalf of anyone. I've been around too much, and I've seen too much mistrust, and frankly, I've seen too much bad behavior, really bad behavior, in terms of intimidation, in terms of assassination, in terms of steps that have been taken for me to turn around and say that one side in the dispute is all angels and one side in the dispute is all evil. It's more complex than that. But I do believe, Mr. Speaker, that there are a couple of things we need to understand and really focus on as a country. The majority in Sri Lanka, the Sinhala people, have yet to make, I think, the critical decision that a majority in every country has to make at some point, and that is a deep willingness, not just a verbal willingness, not just a willingness on paper, but a deep willingness to share power. They have not been able to make that at critical moments, at critical junctions in the history of the country. There have been times when they've come up to saying, yes, this is something we should explore, whether it's a federal model, whether it's a devolution model, whatever name you might happen to give to it, Mr. Speaker. They've come to a certain point and then it's pulled back. and there is a political contest in Sri Lanka between different political parties. And when one party representing the majority says, yes, we're prepared to go, then they're attacked as being weak by the other party. And then when that other party gets into power and in itself recognizes that a compromise is necessary, it then in turn gets criticized. So that's the problem on the one side. There clearly was a decision taken by the new administration led by President Rajapaksa to say we are going to try to force a military solution to this conflict. I took great issue with it when I saw it unfolding, and I, of course, have been subject to rather intense criticism from the government of Sri Lanka for taking that position, because I saw it unfolding and I thought it was a path that would not succeed, and a path that would lead to tremendous human devastation and terrible, terrible consequences for the people in the north and east. On the other side, Mr. Speaker, I have to say that the Liberation Tigers of Tamil Eelam, like every guerrilla army, at one point face a choice. It's a choice that was faced by the PLO. It's a choice that was faced by the African National Congress, and the choice is very clear. Do we make the transition from essentially looking at the world through a military lens, through the lens of a guerrilla army, and shift to political tactics and to becoming a political force, or do we maintain the war up to the end? The IRA faced the same choice. And so, yes, you can say this is a terrorist organization because it kills civilians and it carries out suicide bombing and it recruits children. But let's be clear, that can change. Behavior can change. Behavior isn't not a label that lasts for a lifetime. On voit toujours le changement, la possibilité.
We always see change, the possibility of change in the activities of the group, and that's why I worked very hard with the entire leadership of the Tamil Tigers. I met them many times to tell them that they had to change. If there is no change, then a very difficult action will have to be taken. And I remember a conversation I had with Mr. Tamil Chevron, who was killed by the Sri Lankan army, and I said, if things don't change, the military conflict will continue, and we can't guarantee what the outcome will be. And that's what we're witnessing.
It's not a very original thing to say that if you want to end a conflict, both sides need to change. Both sides need to understand that there has to be a turning of the road and a change in behavior. And Mr. Speaker, I want to simply say, as a Canadian, I am so proud of the Canadians that I've met who've been working in Sri Lanka, of the young men and women who've been working on removing landmines before the tsunami. Now, of course, it's a much more difficult thing to do. Of the aid workers, and we have some fantastic aid workers who are working for all of the NGO organizations that the minister has named, as well as many others. They're risking their lives and their health, and many of us have family. My friend from Dartmouth's sister is working as an aid worker in Sri Lanka. We have so many ties with this country. The ties that existed through the Commonwealth, the ties that, of course, have been hugely strengthened and changed by the hundreds of thousands of people who came, and I happened to be in office at the time in Ontario when we had a tremendous influx of Tamils coming in. And now we see their children doing so brilliantly in school. We see such a tremendous new generation of Tamil Canadians growing up, and it's an extraordinary thing to see. But, Mr. Speaker, right now we're in the middle of a humanitarian disaster. It's a disaster that we can all see coming as the logical outcome of people looking for an exclusively military solution to this conflict. I'm so pleased that today the minister said the solution will not be found on the battlefields of Sri Lanka. It will not be found in the jungles of the Vani. The solution will be found when people finally recognize that we have to talk. And Canada has to be at the lead of those talks. We have an experience with devolution. We have an experience of a majority population understanding that it has to share power. And we can argue with our friends in the Bloc Québécois about how fair that sharing is, but nevertheless, I'm sure that even they would say that the Canadian federal example is one of civility. We can have our differences, but it is based on civility. And it is that value and that issue that we have to take forward. So, Mr. Speaker, it is a humanitarian tragedy. We do need to debate this question going forward, and we do need to do everything we can, working, yes, with the government of Sri Lanka and yes, through whatever channels of communication we have with the Liberation Tigers of Tamaulipas, to say both sides have to change. The perpetuation of an attempt to find a military solution to this conflict simply will not work. And that's what has to change, Mr. Speaker, and I'm very pleased to have been able to participate in the debate on behalf of my party. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Questions and comments. Questions and commentaire. The honourable member for Ottawa Centre.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and I want to thank my colleague from Toronto and actually a former leader of mine, if I can say that, because he does understand probably more than any of us the intricacies of this issue. So I want to get straight to it. I do not want to descend into a debate that will take us to other places tonight. I think what we're here to do tonight is to discuss what Canada's role should be, what we can do productively, and how we can seek peace in a place that right now doesn't seem like there's a lot of hope. So to the member, he referenced Mr. Miliband and others in the world community. I'm wondering if he can give us some of his ideas of other international forums where we can advance the voice of peace and be constructive. And I'm thinking here now of is it plausible for Canada to raise, certainly we're not at the Security Council, I know we want to have a chair there, but to raise in the General Assembly the issue of ceasefire to the Security Council. That's my first question to him, and how realistic that is and what we can do to advance that. And secondly, you know, the Commonwealth is lately a fairly dormant institution, but if not for this cause, then what cause can it be for? And if he sees any possibilities to work within that institution as well. Thank you.
The honourable member for Toronto.
Mr. Speaker, I think that it's fair comment to say that the United Nations Undersecretary for Humanitarian Affairs, Mr. Holmes, has spoken out about this. The Secretary General has spoken out about this. It's very difficult because I can tell you the government of Sri Lanka resists very strongly any notion that the United Nations has jurisdiction over something which they regard as an area of their national sovereignty. I know my colleague from Mount Royal is one of the experts in this whole question of the doctrine of our responsibility to protect. At what point does the condition of a civilian population give the United Nations the right and the ability to intervene? Mr. Gareth Evans, the former Foreign Secretary of Australia, now the President of the International Crisis Group, has talked extensively about this question, frankly, as has our leader, who was involved in drafting the protocol on the question of the responsibility to protect. I think the UN administratively is going to be engaged. Whether we can get the Security Council engaged is another question. There are many powers on the Security Council who may not be interested in seeing that happen. I also agree with him that the Commonwealth is one mechanism. But I want to just make one point, Mr. Speaker, and I don't want to engage in a debate with the minister or with others, but just to say the group that has to make a decision now, as much as any group, as to how it is going to proceed, is the LTTE. And I think that it's up to the diaspora community in this country and around the world to really ask the question of their friends, cousins, relatives, and others, what do we think we're going to achieve by perpetuating a military conflict in the way in which it has been conducted over the last while? And I think we have to recognize that that's what the Tokyo Group was saying yesterday, and I think that's something that Canada should support.
Questions and comments. Questions and commentaire. The honourable member for Scarborough-Guildwood.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and I want to congratulate the honourable member on a very knowledgeable speech on this area. I know he's been there many times. In his capacity as a participant in the Forum of Federations, there was, I would suggest, a significant opportunity a few years ago to actually talk at a meaningful level to the various actors in the peace about the issue of whether a devolved federation could, in fact, be achieved. Since this war is an unwinnable war, that there is no military solution to this war, is that still the starting point of once peace negotiations, or once hostilities cease, as they inevitably will, is that a starting point for the participants?
There's about 45 seconds left for the honourable.
December of 2002, both parties agreed in Oslo, I was there, Both parties agreed that they would use federalism as the basis for future discussion. Can we return to that? I personally hope that we could in some way. Let's not forget the basis of federalism, Mr. Speaker, is self-government and shared government. That's the decision that we made as a country historically in the years leading up to 1867. Self-government, shared government. I think that that's one of the ways in which one could look at finding a solution that would allow the island to remain as one, which is a very important objective of the majority, and at the same time provide for some self-government for the Tamil community. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Resuming debate, the honourable member for Mount Royal.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker.